Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Theology of Business podcast. I'm your host, Darian Shear, and this is a show for marketplace Christians seeking to explore and apply God's will for business. On this episode, we're joined by Dr. Jakub. Jay is the Chief Advocacy Officer for the Economics of Mutuality movement, which originated at Mars Incorporated, and that's a $40 billion company with over 130,000 employees around the world. If you're not familiar, they're the maker of M&M's, Snickers, and other tasty, iconic brands. Jay and his colleague Bruno Roche collaborated on a fascinating book, Completing Capitalism, a rigorous practical case study for the economics of mutuality. In addition, this growing movement is now taught globally through Oxford University's Said Business School and other prestigious schools around the world. Jay, welcome to the Theology of Business podcast.
Thanks, Darren. Glad to be here.
So why don't you go ahead and give us a better sense of how the economics of mutuality movement originated?
Sure. I spent the last 14 years or so in the global headquarters of Mars Incorporated, which is this iconic food and beverage company that you mentioned, working in the global headquarters. It's a family-owned, privately held business that had a really unique sort of internal think tank that was created by the founder of Mars, Forrest Mars Sr., back in the 1960s to challenge orthodox business thinking with a ring-fenced budget and really a lot of freedom to go out and look for what the real next big idea is. So I helped the chief economist of Mars, who's the managing director of this Catalyst internal think tank, is what it was called, to help lead that effort. And in 2007, just at the start of 2007, John Mars, one of the leaders of the three branches of the Mars family that own the whole company outright, he asked a really interesting question of his CEO at that time. He asked, what should the right level of profit be for the company? Now, this is the kind of question, Darren, that you probably know in this world of Milton Friedman's financial capitalism, where it's all about maximizing shareholder value, that shareholders typically just assume that the answer to a question like how much is the right level of profit is as much as you can possibly squeeze out of the value chain. But actually, John Mars was thinking very differently about this. And when he asked the question, he was thinking maybe there was an optimum level of profit above which you were taking too much, and that you would actually disadvantage yourself because you're only as strong as the weakest link in your value chain. So if you take too much profit from your value chain or your stakeholder, or your ecosystem of stakeholders, you're basically going to set off this chain reaction that's a squeezing effect of one partner squeezing another for more and more profit. And you're ultimately going to create this kind of disequilibrium in your business value chain that's going to disadvantage you, but you're not going to have any idea where it's coming from. So that question was given to the CEO. The CEO came to the internal think tank and basically said, if we go to Goldman Sachs, we go to McKinsey, we know what the answer is going to be as much as possible, but that's not the answer that we're looking for here. So go ahead and take a look at this question. So we did, actually, and being an internal think tank, the first thing that we did was go and do a literature review and try to find out what everybody else was saying about this very, very interesting and provocative question. And we found nothing. Actually, it was like it was a blank space in the management literature. So we started to wonder, is this a new question? Or is this something that's been around for a while? And actually, we went back and all the way back to maybe several thousand years ago to King Solomon the Wise, who had a lot of ancient words of wisdom, one of which was, a man may give freely and still his wealth will be increased, and another may keep back more than his right, but come to be in need. And this was fascinating because we thought, that's actually getting right at the heart of the question of what's the right level of profit should be. And of course, King Solomon said that in the book of Proverbs. And we thought, okay, so this is something that goes a lot deeper than just a new management question within the context of the last 50 years of Friedman's financial capitalism. So that's how we got started.
Yeah, wow. And so the way that you articulate and kind of encapsulated what's wrong is that capitalism is incomplete. And so you talk about completing capitalism. How is capitalism incomplete?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And actually, we gave a lot of thought when we wrote the book, Completing Capitalism, Heal Business to Heal the World, to what the title should be. And actually, we sort of came up with it at the last moment. And it was really an important moment for us because it not only captured exactly what we're trying to do, but it also diffused any political or ideological aspect of what we're doing, because this is not sort of something that the left or the right can embrace or reject and say that it belongs to the other side. Actually, I found that when I talk to people who are real critics on the left of capitalism and may favor something that's much more radical as a solution, when they hear that this is about completing capitalism, they figure, okay, you recognize that capitalism is flawed, that it's incomplete, and things can be changed for the better. Similarly, when you're talking to people who are very focused on free market economics and are wedded to the current model of financial capitalism in a purer form, they think, oh, so there's an opportunity to complete capitalism and upgrade it, basically make it more contextual. So there's no sort of political or ideological aspect of this. It's something that truly, for me, at least personally speaking, comes from above, and not from either side, so to speak. So completing capitalism, the reason why we use that term is if you go back about 50 years to 1970, Milton Friedman from the Chicago School of Business was a famous economist at that time. And economics is really about the management of scarcity, and that the form of scarcity that existed in 1970 was very different than the forms of scarcity that exist today. Really, there was a lack of money, financial capital in the global economy. But there was a surplus of natural resources at that time. There was a surplus of labor for the job market as well. So it's not surprising somebody would step forward with a model to address the form of scarcity that was existing. And financial capitalism was all about generating as much money as possible that could be accumulated almost into infinity, and that really was part of the rules of the game of that form of economy. Well, fast forward 50 years, and what do you have? You have financial capitalism having created so much of an excess, I would say a dysfunctional excess of financial capital, that far from being scarce, it's actually threatening the viability of the global economy, because there's just way too much of it, and it's not underpinned by anything of value other than the fact that people believe it has value. So it's very fragile, actually, financial capital now, because it's in such excess. But the forms of scarcity are now the opposite of what they were in 1970. We have a severe shortage of natural resources, what we call natural capital, in the world of this business model that I'm going to talk about with you today in a few minutes. And we also have a shortage of talent matching the jobs that are being created in the new economy, which is often called the knowledge economy, really because it's about accessing knowledge to do what it is you want, rather than just having as much money as you need to buy everything you think you need. Really, there's a lot of knowledge you can't buy. You need to get it through your relationships, your social capital, which again, I'll talk about a bit more later. It's also got a digital component to it, this new form of economy. And economies evolve over time. And whenever they evolve, the rules of the game change, and the models need to be upgraded and adapted to the new rules of the game. So essentially what we have here is a very incomplete form of capitalism, this financial capitalism model. It's very rudimentary in that it only values and measures through a robust set of metrics one form of capital among four, which is money, at the expense of the other forms of non-financial capital, which are social capital, human capital, and natural capital. And so what we're trying to do here is create a more complete form of capitalism by harnessing the power of the non-financial forms of capital and integrating them into the enlarged definition of performance of a company, so that it's not all about financial capital maximization anymore, that there's actually significant value to be had by being able to manage, measure, and mobilize all four forms of capital. So that's what I mean when I say about creating a more complete form of capitalism.
Yeah. One of the concepts I've heard you and Bruno Roche refer to is the Old Testament concept of Jubilee. How did that provide some inspiration for this model?
Yeah, and I should say as a caveat that this is I'm a believer, and Bruno is as well. So this is very much, this part of the conversation is very much coming out of our personal views. So it's not sort of representative of anything that's coming out of Mars, which is a very secular company. And even the organization I belong to now is also a secular company as well. So just want to get that clear right from the outset. But this concept of the Jubilee is actually very important to Bruno and I. And actually, when he was a young man, he had this kind of vision that Leviticus chapter 25 in the Old Testament, also in the Torah, was actually something that was a blueprint for how the kingdom economy actually should function. So far from being sort of in the past in terms of a two-dimensional kind of Old Testament thing where we can draw some lessons from, but not necessarily utilize in businesses of today. It was absolutely something that was living for us. It was living and breathing. And I really personally believe that this is the way the economy ought to operate. And I'll let you know what I mean about that for your listeners. So basically, the Jubilee is about, again, outlined in Leviticus chapter 25, if you want to go back and look at it with fresh eyes at some point. It's about essentially how do you remunerate people, the land, and financial capital, essentially with rest, or a Shabbat, Sabbath in Hebrew. Basically, there's 1 day of rest in every 7 for people, which is a Shabbat for people. And that's explained very clearly in Leviticus 25. There's similarly 1 year of rest in every 7 for the land, which is, again, another Shabbat. The land is remunerated with 1 year that the soil is meant to lay fallow. And then every 49 years for 1 year, which is the 50-year Jubilee cycle, financial capital is really meant to be remunerated with its own form of a Shabbat, where debt is forgiven and there's kind of a reset of sorts. Now, I'm not saying economics of mutuality, which is this business model management innovation that was kind of created with the inspiration of this kind of Jubilee concept, follows a literal application of all these principles, but it's definitely inspired by this Jubilee approach, in that the economic system itself really should account for what we call the 3 pillars of economic prosperity, which is a truth that has been such for millennia. Basically, the land is there that provides, the labor transforms and adds value, and money is there to provide liquidity in the system. In fact, the word capital, which everybody refers to as financial capital, even though it's just one of multiple forms of capital, it comes from the word capita, which means heads of animals that could actually be moved, enabling trade and transactions really to be more mobile. So each of these 3 pillars of prosperity for any economy, essential for any economy, land, labor, and financial capital, they all have different time horizons in the Jubilee as well. Nature has this very long time horizon of 7 years. Labor is somewhere in the middle, and financial capital is really remunerated on a shorter term basis. So these factors all really need to be taken into account, but they're not in today's dominant financial capitalism model, whereby all the energy and all of the metrics are all about financial profit, and metrics for people, which we call social and human capital, and for the environment, which what we call natural capital, are very rudimentary and not very applicable in terms of value creation, but they need to be, especially because of the new nature of scarcity in the global economy. Because there's a lot of truths that intersect in terms of the spiritual and the natural in this way.
Yeah. Usually when I hear people talking about these concepts, it just kind of stays at the philosophical level. But I like what I've heard you say is you only manage what you measure. And so you're not just measuring the financial bottom line, but also you have metrics to gauge to how are you being a steward of the land, the labor, and not just the financial aspects. What are some of those metrics that you use to really put these things into action and to manage them?
I'm glad you made that point, Darren, because this is not philosophical. It's not impractical. It's actually eminently practical. And that's why we started actually this work by spending almost 5 years. Now, of course, we were doing other things as well in the internal think tank, but the work on economics of mutuality started with a focus on metrics. How can we measure non-financial forms of capital with the same robustness, simplicity, uniformity, standardization, whatever you want to call it, as we measure financial capital? Because if it's too complex, businesses will not be able to utilize these forms of metrics for the other forms of capital. So if I could just share a little bit about each one, just to kind of give you a top-level overview. Social capital was where we started, and social capital has been around as a concept for over a century, and there are maybe 60 to 100 different metrics or variables that you can use in the lexicon of social capital to describe what a social capital space looks like. So that's horrendously complex, and that's not usable for business. So we really sort of drilled in, and we brought on board a development economist who is really brilliant, a guy named Alain Dedois, a professor from the Sorbonne in France, to help us create a quantitative survey instrument that we could utilize to measure social capital, because we knew we had to make it more simple. But we also knew that accuracy was going to be key. And so the qualitative side of social capital needed in the world. His name was Peter Berger, an Austrian professor, but who was at Boston University for a long time. And Peter was there really to challenge with his quantitative lens, the sociological lens of going out into the field and spending sort of 7 years sitting around watching communities before you actually can determine anything about what a social capital space might look like, to really challenge the survey instrument that was being developed by the development economists with our team. And ultimately, to make a long story short, we tested this survey instrument in multiple types of business environments, from impoverished coffee farmers in Papua New Guinea to coffee farmers in Tanzania to cocoa farmers in West Africa to distributors of Wrigley's chewing gum, which was in the Mars portfolio in places like Vietnam and elsewhere. And we discovered through this very objective measurement work that our survey instrument had identified 3 variables out of those 60 to 100 that were always the same and always accounted together for about 80% of what the social capital space looked like at a community level, wherever we did it, no matter what the business conditions were, the market forces, the culture, whatever. And they were essentially trust within a community, social cohesiveness, and the capacity of that community to work collectively for the common good. And by focusing just on those 3 variables, weighted differently depending on what the situation was, always these 3, you could account for 80% of the social capital space of any business situation. Therefore, it was eminently simplified and usable for what we were doing. For human capital, it was quite different, the approach. Instead of having sort of 3 universal metrics, human capital for us was about how do you identify individual well-being at work through what the true drivers of well-being are among the workforce in any particular culture. So if you were working at a Goldman Sachs, you'd have a particular kind of culture. What was most important to your employees, to your workforce, might be different materially than what it could be at a company like Mars. And so I don't know what it is at Goldman Sachs, but I found at Mars, wage disparity as one of the descriptors of human capital, of a driver of well-being, wasn't even in the top 5 for Martians, is what we used to call ourselves. And I think they still do over there. Really, the number 1 driver of well-being in the Mars business context among the workforce was, do managers actually walk the talk of the values they espouse? And that this was roughly equivalent to a 30% pay increase that you would not have to give, actually, if you could find a way through some HR interventions to grow the human capital, the trust, the social cohesiveness around the confidence of that workforce in the fact that the managers were actually doing what they said that they believed in. And so really, it's not a uniform set of metrics. Those metrics change depending on the culture, but what is uniform and standard is the methodology we use to collect the data and analyze it and determine what the true drivers of well-being are. Now, know that these forms of capital have significant impact on your performance, because if you think about human capital, about addressing the well-being of your workforce, helping your workforce identify their vocation at an individual level, letting them live that out within the context of the company's purpose, can be very powerful. You get 3 things when you do that properly in a business model, management, innovation type of approach. You get talent attraction, and we're in a war for talent right now. So getting and keeping the right talent is critically important to the success of your business. Talent retention, it's the best and the brightest that you invest the most in that often leave the most quickly if their purpose is not being met. And then optimization of performance, because people whose purpose is being met in their jobs are much more likely to stay there and to outperform those who are not happy that they're there for other reasons. So that's kind of how social and human capital work. And then on natural capital, natural resources is a kind of a slightly different story. Most companies look at, they have 1 metrics that in a very simplified way accounts for the natural resources that a company is involved with, and it's called carbon footprint. And you've probably heard of carbon footprint. Everybody talks about that in the business context, and that's important, but it's not a tool or an insight that managers can use to manage to more resource efficient outcomes. it's called an output metric, and it's about external reporting and benchmarking. So, it's fine for that role, but it's not a leading indicator. It's a lagging indicator. A leading indicator would actually help you drive greater value creation, including, not depleting your resources, but being more efficient with them. And so we, in the economics of mutuality, utilize 5 universal input metrics that have to do with biotic and abiotic materials, or organic or inorganic materials, land erosion, soil erosion, air and water. And not all of those metrics are always actionable on their own in every business situation. But when they are, you actually can get some really powerful insights into what you can do as a manager to be more resource efficient. And by doing so, you leave a smaller footprint. So it's really actionable for a business model and contributes to the performance of the company. So that's kind of where we come up with these 13 metrics: 5 for natural capital, 5 for human capital, and 3 for social capital, and 13 metrics to cover all 3 forms of non-financial capital. That's a very small number of metrics, very easy to work with in business.
Yeah. And our audience will, I'm sure, notice that financial metrics were not included there. So the idea is that you focus on the 3. The 4th is more of a lagging indicator, or?
Well, no, we use financial capital as well. It's one of the 4 forms of capital, but it just happens to have all of the metrics that it needs at present, whereas the other 3 forms of capital are virtually ignored by business or mishandled. And so if companies really want to be able to measure, manage, and mobilize all 4 forms of capital, they really need to have kind of simple, stable, uniform metrics. And the other big discovery we made after we cracked the ability to actually measure these things with the same simplicity and robustness as financial capital is that we found through our field experiments a very strong relationship, causal effect really, between how much non-financial capital, human, social, and natural, that a company creates or destroys in every business activity, and how much financial capital in terms of economic performance is actually released. Now, this is absolutely critical to understand because if you're working in a kind of traditional corporate social responsibility type of role, or if you're just working in the sustainability space, which is very important, so I'm not diminishing those spaces, but there is a kind of underlying assumption when you do something good in business through CSR or through sustainability, that there's an inherent trade-off of profit to do some good for people and planet. And what we've discovered by scouring hundreds and hundreds of sustainability reports is that none of them are scalable. And the reason they're not scalable, which is the prerequisite of being transformational for business, is because they're not profitable enough to be self-sustaining, right? And if it's not self-sustaining, it can't be scalable by nature. So you can kind of do some good for people and planet by trading profit, but it's really hard to scale up. And if you can't scale, it's really hard to really move the needle and transform your business into something that's much more purposeful and responsible, and in ways that you can prove through measurement. So this not having to trade profit to do good for people and planet is central to how we do this. And we need those building blocks of social, human, and natural capital and financial capital because they need to work synergistically with one another. When you create through your management practices of any business activity more human, social, or natural capital, you can expect a better impact on your top and bottom line. Similarly, if you're damaging human, social, or natural capital with your business practices, you have a drag on your P&L, on your profit and loss statement. So you, both on your top and bottom line, are suffering, but you don't see it because you don't realize that it's because of the fact that your business practices are not responsible, they're not purposeful, they're damaging, either nature or individual well-being or community trust, that you're acting as a drag on your own profitability and on your growth. So you can look at it as a blessing or a curse. It's an opportunity or it's something that's a drag. I tend to look at it as an opportunity, to do better, but also to be more resilient and more profitable. There's no reason why you can't be more profitable with this approach if you're not chasing the money, if you're actually trying to fix the problems of others and leverage the non-financial forms of capital.
Yeah. Well, that was an important point you made about scalability is a prerequisite for it to be transformational and really affect the culture on a macro level. What success, Jay, have you found as a result of companies implementing this model?
Well, for many years, we worked just inside Mars Incorporated because we were the internal think tank of Mars Incorporated. And I remember when we first cracked the measurement challenge of non-financial forms of capital, and then we found this connection between non-financial forms of value and greater value creation on economic performance and financial performance. We went to the president of Mars Wrigley's, which was the big Wrigley chewing gum company, which Mars had acquired in 2008, I believe. And the president of Mars Wrigley is a guy named Mark Radvan. He was a really strong supporter of what it was we were doing. And he said, now I need you to show me how this works in a real business. So why don't you go to East Africa, where we have the only Wrigley's factory producing chewing gum on the whole continent of Africa, and show me what you can do with these insights. So we went out there and we sat down with the general manager, I remember, and the general manager was really excited about what we had to say about the vision for this work. Of course, we didn't have any data to show because we hadn't tried it yet. And he said, I love what you're saying. It sounds very inspiring, but I have to deliver really tough performance targets that are financial in nature, and I can't have you guys come in here and compromise my ability to do that. So don't break anything. And that means you can't work where we're already working. So we said, okay, well, where can we work? And he said, well, there's some slum areas that are around Nairobi, Kenya, which happen to be the largest slums in all of Africa. And they're called Kwangwera and Kibera and a few other places that were rural that were very impoverished. And the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company really had routes to market for this chewing gum product that used master distributors and used all the kind of traditional techniques that you would find in financial capitalism to create a route to market for chewing gum to get from the factory into the hands of retailers and ultimately into the hands of consumers. Well, we took a look at these slum areas and these rural areas that were impoverished, and we thought, okay, this is going to be really challenging because there's no natural capital that's visible. There's no financial capital that's visible. There's no human capital, well-being that's visible. And there's some social capital, but it's kind of off on its own. How are we going to build a business like this using traditional means of distribution? And we realized we can't. That we, as a corporation that's a Western multinational, we have no credibility and little brand recognition, no social capital, really no trust of these local communities. And that when people sell chewing gum retail outlets, it's not in supermarkets and Walmarts in these slum areas. It's in little wooden kiosks run by people that will only buy the product from people that they grew up with, that they know, because they have trust in them. They have the social capital. So we thought, okay, how are we going to do this? And we realized we needed to throw out the playbook of traditional business, and we needed to think out of the box and start working with citizen sector organizations, nonprofits, microfinance lenders, those that businesses traditionally don't work with for something like a route to market business for a product like this. But these were the organizations that actually had the social capital in the communities that we wanted to work in that we did not. Even a church that I happen to know the leadership of out there that was a mega church called Mavuno, it happened to be adjacent to these slum areas. And I remember being out there helping the program leader set up this program. And I took the pastor and his wife out to dinner, and I just told them about what we were doing in Kwangwera and Kibera. And they got really excited and said, we have thousands of parishioners who are young entrepreneurial Kenyans, men and women, who are in our Mavuno church, and they live in those slum areas and they have no jobs, they have no opportunities. How about if we partner with the secular Wrigley's Corporation in Kenya and become a pipeline for scaling up the program, and we'll direct our youth into your micro distribution jobs in exchange for and what we'll do for you as well is we'll commit to mentoring them to keep them on the straight and narrow. And sure enough, we introduced that church to the Wrigley's leadership, and they thought this was a great way to scale up this program. So just to make a long story short, because I think this is important to understand how we got started. So we created this very different kind of approach where it was about identifying stakeholders brought together around the purpose of the business, which we expressed. And these stakeholders really were non-traditional players. So we found, for example, a nonprofit that was in the slums to try to uplift unemployed single mothers to find job opportunities for them. but they were suffering from the fact that they just didn't have enough good job opportunities to offer them. So they were willing to partner with us, a Western multinational for-profit. This nonprofit was willing to partner with us and help recruit these women who were unemployed single mothers to be micro distributors of Wrigley's chewing gum and to help train them to do that. And what they got out of it was they were able to be more effective in what they were doing because they were providing better jobs to these people and helping them lift up. We were getting access to the nonprofit, which had the trust in the community so that they could actually recruit people into our programs. Well, then we realized that these people had no money and they had no possessions to collateralize so that they could get even a loan, a micro loan, to buy a bicycle with a basket on it, to pedal out to a central stop point and pick up the chewing gum and then bring it in and start distributing it to the kiosks that were the retailers. And so we didn't want to be a bank and lend them money. We didn't want to guarantee those loans either. But we found a micro lender that was also having a lot of trouble operating in these slum areas because it could not meet its mission objective, which was execute X number of microloans, because it couldn't figure out how to collateralize anything that these people had or didn't have. And they realized that they could use as a proxy the fact that these people were micro distributors in a program run by a Western multinational corporation that was very well known. So we struck a partnership with, again, a microfinance lender that was there to do good. And they were able to be the funding source for these people to get microloans to start getting on their feet and become operational as distributors of the product. Anyway, to make a long story short, this program just took off, this initiative. And we found out that we also changed what are called in business the KPIs, the key performance indicators. So the metrics that managers are required to deliver against to get their bonuses, from things like retained earnings for the company and sales and those kinds of things that are traditional, to human capital and social capital. And we taught the business how to deliver through interventions greater human capital, greater well-being, greater social capital, greater trust. And we tracked those things. And we found that as they delivered more and more social and human capital in this business, that sales and retained earnings went up, scalability of the program went up, the quality of life of those people went up. The retention rates went, crazy. They were like 90% for a long period of time. And the profitability to the company doubled what the neighboring business was doing with wealthier consumers, with more brand recognition, with traditional route to market type master distribution and so forth. So it really proved that if you don't chase the money, if you actually look at how you can bring together the right stakeholders around purpose and then deliver greater human and social value to people, that in that program, that actually you'll wind up with a better business that's even up to twice as more profitable, if not more so. And so this program is really scaling up to 4 different countries now: Egypt, India, the Philippines, in addition to Kenya, and it's doing really well. And then on the other end of the scale, we took this to a pet food company within the Mars portfolio that was the crown jewel. It was called Royal Canin. It still is. And it's about a $6 billion company that sells a very, very high quality, high nutrition pet food that would cost about 80 euros or close to $100 a bag for a bag of dog food in Europe. This is not a product that the poorest among the poor can afford. Only the wealthiest consumers in the most mature markets can afford that. In different contexts, but very similar approaches as we used in elsewhere in deploying the economics of mutuality, starting with purpose, building an ecosystem of stakeholders necessary to deliver that purpose, mapping them out, identifying what their pain points were, what were they suffering from, creating some interventions to grow the different forms of capital that will address the problems of the stakeholders rather than just trying to extract as much value as we can from the stakeholders. And what happened? It started to deliver much more holistic and financial value for Royal Canin, even in the short term. So we've seen it work from one end of the scale to the other. Now we've moved outside of Mars as of August of 2020, and we've been working with other companies with Mars, but also with a very large retail group that's headquartered in France that has 11 multinational corporations in it. We've been working for 2 of those big companies, delivering very promising results. We're also soon working for a large UK bank, for a couple of technology companies in the US, for a pharma company in Germany. And again, the more work we do on this, the more we publish on it. So we put out more and more case study data when we can do that with the company's permission. And we try to share the learnings and teach this as well at the executive education level and also in universities at the MBA level. So I guess those are some examples of success that we've witnessed as a result of companies implementing this.
Yeah. Wow. So Jay, as you talk to business owners and you notice that they're just not measuring this stuff, they're not tracking this stuff, and so therefore they can't manage it. What would be maybe one or two of those metrics that you would say, okay, you got to start implementing this today. You got to start watching this. So maybe one or two metrics that we should be watching, but most likely in your experience just aren't. And then how do we measure it? How do we and not just sort of, we write down on a Likert scale 1 to 5, but actually like really measure it over time.
Well, there's a lot of metrics that are out there. ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Governance is a big term these days, and so companies are increasingly being required to report on what are called ESG metrics. The problem with ESG metrics is that there's a very, very large quantity of those metrics, and none of them, to my knowledge, is directly connected to value creation in a business. So they kind of have limited utility. We like to stick with the basic building blocks, the social, human, and natural capital that I laid out, and the financial capital. And I've shared with you 13 metrics that together cover all of what you need to be able to work with those non-financial forms of metrics, to be able to measure them, manage with them, and mobilize the value creation that is inherent in them. So that would be where I would start. I mean, it's not sort of one or two metrics. It's the three forms of non-financial capital and the small number of metrics, relatively speaking, that unlock those to help your business perform more holistically, more financially, and more purposefully. And companies that actually deliver their purpose as strategy rather than just talk about their purpose, they're the ones that actually become more profitable and more resilient over time. But
so the one about trust. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a reason we called this book Completing Capitalism: Heal Business to Heal the World, because there's a real temptation to think that, okay, this is just another clever way to make companies more money in the new context. It's really instead about healing broken relationships between business and the environment, and broken relationships between business and people, most certainly. And I think companies have lost the trust of the consumer. They've often lost the trust of governments. And partly that's because Friedman's approach can be summarized in one way as the sole social responsibility of business is to maximize shareholder value. Well, 50 years ago, 100 of the largest economies in the world were all nation states. Today, I think it's about 69 of the largest economies are multinational corporations. So if multinational corporations don't step into the responsibility role that they have now because of their size and influence, nobody is going to be able to solve the biggest challenges we have to people on the planet. So that's where I kind of stand on that issue.
Yeah. And so where can people go to connect? And do you actually, for let's say I'm a company, I've got 10 employees, are we kind of too small for you to come and work with us? So do you have resources that you provide to kind of help people do like a self-assessment, or what options do you have for any?
Well, my company at this time is a small one. So we have about 20 people and a global remit. And so we tend to work with larger companies, but economics and mutualities for companies of all sizes. There's no question about that. So there's lots of ways that smaller companies can get involved. And actually, in many ways, it's easier to implement this with a clean slate in a startup than it is trying to get a huge corporation to start to unlearn many of the lessons that keep them locked into the financial capitalism kind of approach of old, and open their minds to the fact that you can create a more complete form of capitalism. So, I think to really move the needle, we need to work first with some of the larger corporations, but smaller corporations can engage in different ways. One is that we have an annual economics and mutuality executive education program that we do at Oxford University. And because of the COVID the last 2 years, we've found great success in doing it virtually, which also makes it a lot easier for business leaders to attend, because they can do it over 4 weeks and maybe 6 hours a week, and do it all online, so they can still do their jobs while they're enrolled in the course. So that's one way to really start to get a hands-on, deeper knowledge about the practical application of this without having to engage the company directly as a consulting in a consulting arrangement. Second is take a look at this book, Completing Capitalism, Heal Business, Heal the World. It'll give you a good sense of where we started and where we're going. It gives some case study material. We recently published another book with our Oxford partners that has about 30 co-authors. I'm one of them, and it's called Putting Purpose into Practice, The Economics of Mutuality. And it was put out by Oxford University Press in March of this year, but we cut a deal with them because it's an expensive book to buy online, that we have a free download of this on our website, which is the other way to learn more about what we're doing, which is eom.org. That's EOM for Economics of Mutuality.org. And in that, you can find lots of different events that we do, including an annual forum that's online at Oxford. We just finished our 6th annual Oxford EOM forum, in which we bring in outside speakers, present case studies. We have lots of free information and the ability to network around this issue. We give a lot of talks on this topic in often public and non-public settings. I think I've given about 42 keynote talks or guest lectures or whatever just in the course of this last year. COVID has actually made it easier for me to speak to more people because we can do this virtually. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get more information. In our database, in our archive, in the eom.org website, there's over 50 case studies that are in there with lessons that are very relevant to what a little bit that I shared today on this topic.
Excellent. Plenty of content out there to get more from Jay. EOM.org. The book Completing Capitalism, I know, is available everywhere. Dr. Jay Jakub, thank you so much for coming on the show today and helping us grow. We're all better for it.
My pleasure, Darren, and Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners. And I just wish you all the best. And putting purpose into practice is what this is about, and it's possible. And there's a lot of ways to do it, no matter what kind of company you have. So I just urge you to make 2022 the year that you join the movement.
Let's do it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can share your feedback and get more information to help you partner with God in business and disciple your company, your industry, and your community at theologyofbusiness.com. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Highbridge Books and Media, a media agency specializing in publishing and promoting the world-changing ideas of inspiring thought leaders through book publishing, website development, publicity, email marketing, social media management, podcast management, and video-based course publishing. Take the next step to share your message with the world by contacting us at highbridgemedia.com. Thanks for listening, and keep partnering with God in your business.